All right, well, I wrote a couple of books on localism. One was fairly successful because it focused on here's how they take your freedom and here's what you can do about it, and that's the blue book. But then I wrote an egghead red book that dealt with political philosophy even more than the book that had philosophy in the title. And that was Localism Defended, the narrow path between anarchy and the central state. And I made the case that localism was a moderate philosophy. It just seemed weird because we're in one of the extremes right now. We're in the extreme of a central state, a Leviathan state that is a threat to our rights. And it is just very typical in history. You know, we go back and forth, reaction, overreaction, and hopefully we settle on a decent course over time. But the reaction to the Leviathan state has been a rise in a philosophy of anarchism, that really we don't even need a government. A government is actually more trouble than it's worth. And there are cases when that's true, and I go over that in the book, but today I want to talk about ethical symmetry and delegation, because it is the philosophical basis that many anarchists use to justify their views on how government should be limited. And again, localism is in the middle. Government should be limited. It's based on the classical view that men are endowed by their Creator with unalienable rights. And a right is a claim against the state. It's a claim against your neighbors. It's saying, here's an area of my life that is not up for vote. I have freedom to operate within this sphere, even if we're living in the same city. Now, the collectivists, of course, hate all that. And they hate all the idea of authority being divided into jurisdictions, local, geographically, that mostly make up the rules, instead of the rules being made up in one central place. So that people actually have a free market choice of government, and people who want less government can gravitate to those places, and they can't be touched by the central state eager to exercise more control over their life. They hate that. They have an idea about authority too, just authority. And in their view, they want the collective, the voice of the people is the voice of God kind of thing, where, and then of course they manufacture the opinions of allegedly the people. There may not be any one individual person that actually believes what the voice of the people says, but it's an amalgamation of a bunch of different ideas and special interests jostling with one another, coming up with a compromise that nobody agrees with 100%. But it's a threat to liberty. It's a threat to freedom, and it doesn't make good sense. It's not a recipe for stability and order in society when the moral code on which your society is founded can change with the wind like that. So, it's a mistake on many levels. But delegation and symmetry as a basis for limitation on government power also has some flaws, and that's what I want to talk about today. So, what are they? Well, ethical symmetry is the idea that moral relationships, they are symmetrical. Whatever Fred can do to me, I can also do to him. Whatever Fred shouldn't do to me, I also shouldn't do to him. That is ethical symmetry. We're all playing by the same rules. And, you know, that makes a lot of sense. That's a lot of, people would say, yeah, that makes sense. It is in harmony with the moral code of the universe. And that leads to the principle or the idea of delegation of powers. And they say, well, okay, government's powers are just delegated powers from individuals to the state. I have a right to self-defense, but I'm delegating that power to the state, and I call the policeman when I get in trouble. Or instead of me taking my own revenge and going and get my stuff back when someone robs me, I call the policeman. I delegate to them. And I think there's truth to that, but there's more to it than that. Okay, it's not, we do delegate our powers to government. That's true. But that doesn't mean that government powers are only those that the individual delegates to the state. And what the anarchists are doing here is sort of trying to have it both ways. The collectivists, they're evil, but they think in frameworks, and they've got it said, they know we need a source of moral authority for the society, and we're going to generate it ourselves, and that's their answer. The anarchists are sort of saying, well, there's an existing moral order out there, and it's ethical symmetry is a part of it, and because of that, delegation of powers is a normal result. Well, hold on. If there's a moral order out there, and you're appealing to it, then isn't it above us? Obviously, because we say, yes, ethical symmetry is right. On what basis of it is it right? If there's no higher moral order, it isn't necessarily right. There's no, Fred may say, I'm smarter than Joe. That's why I can impose my opinion on him. Or Joe's of the wrong ethnic group, or anything. And there's no basis for saying, no, you're violating the moral harmony of the universe when you do that. And what anarchists are saying is, ethical symmetry is true and in harmony with the moral order of the universe, and when you violate that, you're doing wrong. And I agree, but that means there's a moral order out there that is higher than the individual, is what that means. Now, the atheist might not like calling it God. It's God. I'm a Christian. To me, yeah, God is the source of a higher moral order to which we as individuals are bound, and the mighty state is bound. The poorest peasant can turn to the king and say, Your Majesty, you're not behaving the way Christ taught us to behave. And he would have a claim against the king, and the king, of course, kings don't like that. So the state sort of bristles at the kind of restraints that higher moral order puts on the conduct of its, wannabe godmen and women. But my point is, you can't have it both ways. You can't have a framework that appeals to a higher moral order and then say the limitations on state power are the limitations of the individual delegating their authority. No, there's a higher moral authority. What if the state is getting its powers from the higher moral authority? Then its powers are not limited to delegated powers from the individual. We may give our consent and we may recognize, yes, this government is operating on behalf of the higher moral order. But it can still have powers beyond the individual. It can tax us when we don't think we should be taxed. And and I don't like it. Believe me, I'm paying a lot of taxes. I'm not getting that much back. And I don't agree with everything is being spent on. But on the question as, does the state have the authority to impose taxes? And the person with delegation and symmetry as their ideal would say no. The person with the classical view is, well, unfortunately, yes, they do. And that's because, for example, taking the Christian view, but this is the classical Western view as well. There's a lot of dovetail there. Romans, I believe it's the 13th chapter, basically says that the state is an agent of God to honor those who do good and bring wrath on evildoers, and that they don't bear the sword for nothing. And so that is not ethical asymmetry. If there's a God and he created you, and government is acting as a servant of God, or they should be, when they don't, they lose their legitimacy, is the idea. But that's not an ethically symmetrical relationship. God can do stuff to us that we can't do to him because he created us, so we owe him, and he knows more than us, and he's more righteous than us, and all those things that as a natural person, I bristle at. But that doesn't mean it's wrong. It just means I don't like it. I don't like the fact that I should listen to someone else, but it's good for me. And so, if any of that is true, then the delegation and symmetry arguments don't work. They don't work because they are simultaneously saying the individual is the highest moral rank, and at the same time there's a higher moral order to which individuals are bound. You can't say those two things at once and make it a logical argument. And so I would say that we should go back to the classical view of rights that maybe, the classical position produced a lot of liberty in human history. But it didn't share the premise that government is in a symmetrical relationship with its subjects. It always said there was an asymmetrical relationship, but it still worked. We still got more and more free until they came up with the 13 doorways to centralized power that I talk about in the Blue Localism book. But government, it still had its limits, but it was not a symmetrical relationship. So that means the powers of government are not limited to whatever an individual's powers are. Yes, I'm delegating some of my powers to the state, but if the state is in the service of a higher moral order, the state has more powers than I have at its disposal. Now, does that mean that the state can trample all over us? No, it means the state is bound too. And that's a good thing. It's good that the state is bound. I still fully believe in the rule of law. The government should follow its own rules, limiting its own behavior, and a lot more. I mean, in localism, government is bound hand and foot, and government is subverted to the free market. So let's say in a localist society, anarchists are in a county, and they're mostly anarchists, and that's what they want the rules to be. That's pretty much what they're going to be within that county. So they can actually have a better chance of trying out their philosophy than they could with the way things are now. So I would say maybe even an anarchist should pull for localism, until we get to the point where, okay, we've won, you have local authority, and classical thinkers say, well, we should have less government, we should have individual rights, but not anarchy. And the anarchists say, no, let's go all the way. And that could be an argument we could have once we've gone the 1,000 miles that we need to go together, I guess. So, at any rate, that is why delegation and symmetry, I don't think it's going to work, but you should have a chance to try it. I appreciate you listening to, not everyone would listen to an egghead lecture like this, but thank you for listening, folks. Bye.